When you hear the word billionaire, most people immediately think of men born into wealth, families with generational money, people who had everything lined up perfectly before they even opened their eyes for the first time. But this story is not one of those. This is the story of a young black man who came into the world with nothing but the clothes on his back, the weight of struggle in his bloodline, and the determination to fight for a future no one believed he could have. It's a story not of luck, but of grit, perseverance, pain, rejection, and an unwavering belief that he was meant for more. He was born in a neighborhood where opportunity never seemed to visit. The streets were filled with broken homes, struggling families, sirens in the night, and the sound of arguments echoing through thin apartment walls. His mother raised him alone, working multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. Some nights dinner was nothing but a slice of bread with sugar sprinkled on top, and yet she made sure he never went to bed without at least something in his stomach. She told him that life would not be fair, that the world would judge him before he even had the chance to introduce himself. But she also told him that his story didn't have to end where it began. From an early age, he was observant. While other kids complained about not having the newest sneakers or the coolest toys, he was busy studying people. He noticed how the men in suits who drove through his neighborhood never looked around, but their cars shined like mirrors. He noticed how the corner stores always had long lines of people spending money they barely had. He noticed how his mother's paycheck disappeared in less than a week, swallowed by rent, bills, and debt. He realized that money was not just paper, it was power. It was the difference between fear and freedom. At school, he wasn't the loudest kid, but he was one of the sharpest. Teachers sometimes overlooked him because of where he came from, but there were a few who saw his hunger to learn. He didn't have tutors or private lessons. He had a worn-out library card, and that became his weapon. He would check out books about business, biographies of successful people, and even books he couldn't fully understand yet, just so he could try. While others laughed at him for acting different, he told himself quietly, "If I don't act different, I'll stay the same as everyone else here." By the time he was 12, he had already faced more challenges than many people do in a lifetime. His family was evicted from their apartment, and for a time they slept on a relative's couch. He would wake up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet breathing of his mother, who worked herself to exhaustion every day. One night, he whispered a promise into the dark, "I will make it out. I don't know how. I don't know when, but I will." That promise became the seed of his transformation. He started small, as every great story does. He knocked on doors in wealthier neighborhoods, offering to mow lawns, shovel snow, wash cars, anything that could bring in a few extra dollars. At first, people looked at him with suspicion. A skinny black kid from the projects standing in front of their perfectly cut lawns. It was not a sight many of them trusted, but he refused to let rejection stop him. For every 10 doors that closed, one opened, and with that one opportunity, he gave his all. He worked faster, harder, cleaner than anyone else. Word spread. Soon, he wasn't just mowing lawns, he was running a small neighborhood service. He had friends helping him, paying them a cut, learning for the first time what it meant to build a team. With every dollar he earned, he saved, while others his age spent money on sneakers or video games. He tucked his earnings into an envelope hidden under his mattress. His mother would sometimes ask him why he didn't buy himself something nice. He would smile and say, "One day, Mom. Not today. I'm building for tomorrow." By high school, he had developed an obsession with understanding money. He would stay up late reading about real estate, about entrepreneurs who had started with nothing, about the power of investing. He didn't have access to financial advisors or wealthy mentors, so he created his own classroom out of every resource he could find. He studied relentlessly, teaching himself the rules of a game most people in his neighborhood didn't even know existed. But life has a way of testing anyone who dares to dream big. In his final year of high school, tragedy struck. His mother fell seriously ill and could no longer work. The hospital bills piled up, and the little money he had saved was swallowed whole. He was faced with a choice: give up on his dream to focus solely on survival, or find a way to turn his pain into fuel. He chose the second. Instead of collapsing under the pressure, he doubled down on his efforts. He started buying old bikes, fixing them up, and selling them for a profit. He turned a few dollars into a few hundred, and a few hundred into his first 1,000. It wasn't easy. There were days he failed. days no one bought what he was selling, days when he questioned whether all his effort was worth it. But each setback was a lesson. He told himself, every no gets me closer to the yes that will change my life. Graduation came, but college was not an option. The tuition was far beyond his reach, and scholarships were slim. While many of his classmates prepared to leave for universities, he entered the real world, armed only with determination and a burning desire to succeed. He took on whatever jobs he could find, warehouse work, construction, delivering food, while continuing his side hustles. He lived frugally, sacrificing short-term pleasures for the vision of long-term freedom. It was during this period that he stumbled onto his first real breakthrough. A rundown property in his neighborhood was being sold at a ridiculously low price. Most people saw it as worthless, a broken building destined to collapse. But he saw potential. He saw an opportunity to create something where others saw nothing. With every dollar he had saved and a small loan from a local credit union, he bought it. He spent months repairing it with his own hands, learning skills on the fly, calling in favors, and working day and night. When it was finally finished, he rented it out and for the first time experienced what it meant to make money while he slept. That one property changed everything. It wasn't just income, it was proof. Proof that his dreams were possible, proof that his vision wasn't foolish, proof that he could defy the statistics stacked against him. From that moment forward, he was hooked. He reinvested every dollar into buying more properties, each one better than the last. He made mistakes along the way, losing money on deals, trusting the wrong people, but each setback only sharpened his instincts. By his mid-20s, he owned several properties and was earning more than he had ever imagined possible. But he wasn't satisfied. Real estate gave him stability, but he wanted impact. He wanted to build something that would not only change his life, but transform the lives of others. That hunger pushed him to explore new industries, technology, finance, and entrepreneurship on a larger scale, and so began the climb that would eventually take him to billionaire status. Opportunities don't just arrive with a knock at the door. Most of the time, they appear disguised as problems, struggles, or ideas that no one else takes seriously. That was exactly how the next stage of his life unfolded. As his rental properties continued to bring in steady income, he began paying attention to the rapid changes happening in the world. Technology was evolving at lightning speed. Apps were being created every day. Young men and women, some not much older than him, were building companies in garages that would later be worth billions. He asked himself a question that kept him awake at night. If they can do it, why not me? He didn't have a background in coding. He didn't have connections in Silicon Valley, and he didn't have investors ready to throw money at him. But what he did have was vision. He had an eye for seeing gaps in the market, problems people were complaining about, and needs that weren't being met. One evening, as he scrolled through his phone after another long day of work, he noticed something. People in his community were constantly talking about how hard it was to send money to family members in different places, especially overseas. Traditional banks charged ridiculous fees, and the process was slow. An idea sparked in his mind. What if there was an easier, cheaper, faster way? That spark turned into fire. He began researching financial technology, what people now call fintech. He studied companies that were making waves in the industry, read every article he could find, and taught himself the basics of digital payments. He spent countless nights in his small apartment, sketching out business models, creating plans, and dreaming of a platform that could revolutionize the way money moved. But dreams need execution, and execution needs courage. He knew he couldn't do it alone, so he started reaching out. He emailed software developers, cold called potential partners, and pitched his idea to anyone who would listen. Most people ignored him. Some laughed. A few even told him outright that a black man from his background had no chance of breaking into such an industry. But rejection had become his fuel long ago. Instead of being discouraged, he became even more determined. After months of persistence, he finally found a small team of like-minded individuals, people who believed in his vision and were willing to work with little or no pay in the beginning. Together, they built the first version of his platform. It wasn't perfect. In fact, it was rough, glitchy, and full of bugs, but it worked. It allowed people to transfer money quickly and cheaply, and that was enough to get started. Launching the business was terrifying. He poured nearly all of his savings into it. He risked the little financial security he had built through real estate, His friends warned him that he was gambling away everything he had worked so hard for. But in his heart, he knew that great risks often lead to great rewards. The early days were brutal. He and his team worked around the clock, sleeping in the office, surviving on cheap takeout, and constantly fixing problems. Some days, the platform crashed. Other days, customers complained. There were moments when he thought about giving up, but then he remembered his promise. The promise he had whispered in the dark as a boy. He wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for his mother, for his community, and for every person who had ever been told that success wasn't meant for them. Slowly but surely, the platform grew. Word spread through neighborhoods, communities, and even across borders. People who had been struggling to send money to loved ones finally had an affordable solution. The company began to attract attention, not just from customers, but from investors. Venture capitalists who had once ignored him now wanted in. Suddenly, he was being invited to boardrooms and meetings he had never imagined himself entering. With investment came expansion. The platform grew from a local service to a global solution handling millions of transactions every day. Partnerships with banks and corporations followed, and soon, his company was valued in the hundreds of millions. He had officially entered the world of high-stakes business, a world that had once seemed impossible for a boy from the projects. But money was never his only goal. Yes, he wanted freedom, but more than anything, he wanted to create impact. As his company scaled, he reinvested in the same neighborhoods that had raised him. He funded scholarships, built community centers, and gave young people access to opportunities he had never had. For him, success wasn't about leaving his roots behind, it was about lifting others up with him. Still, the climb to billionaire status was not without storms. Success attracts competition, criticism, and envy. Rival companies tried to undercut his business. Media outlets questioned his ability to lead. Some investors doubted his decisions. At one point, a major deal fell apart, and the company lost millions in value overnight. The pressure was immense. Sleepless nights returned, and the fear of losing everything haunted him. But he remembered where he had started. He reminded himself that he had faced hunger, eviction, and rejection. He told himself that no amount of business stress could break him because he had already survived worse. With that mindset, he pushed forward. He restructured his company, doubled down on innovation, and came back stronger than ever. By his mid-30s, his company had become one of the fastest-growing fintech firms in the world. His name began appearing on magazine covers, in business journals, and on television. He was invited to speak at conferences, to share his story with audiences hungry for inspiration. He didn't present himself as perfect. He told the truth about his failures, his struggles, and the countless times he almost gave up. That honesty made people believe in him even more. Then came the moment he had dreamed of since he was a child, the day he crossed into billionaire territory. When the valuation of his company soared past the billion-dollar mark and his personal net worth followed, he sat quietly in his office. There was no wild celebration, no expensive champagne. Instead, he closed his eyes and thought of his mother. He thought of the nights she stayed awake sewing clothes to earn a few extra dollars, of the sacrifices she had made, and of the promise he had whispered years ago. He had done it. He had kept his word. But for him, being a billionaire wasn't just about wealth, it was about responsibility. He understood that with great success came great duty, the duty to give back, to inspire, and to pave the way for others who would follow. He began mentoring young entrepreneurs, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds. He launched programs to teach financial literacy, entrepreneurship, and technology to kids who had been told that they would never make it. He became living proof that where you start does not define where you finish. He became the example that poverty, race, and circumstance could not chain a determined mind. He became the beacon of hope that every struggling kid in a broken neighborhood needed to see. And yet, despite the wealth, the fame, and the recognition, he remained humble. He never forgot the taste of struggle, the nights of hunger, or the rejection that had once fueled him. He lived by a simple philosophy: success is not measured by what you have, but by what you give. The world now saw him as a billionaire entrepreneur, a visionary leader, a philanthropist. But at his core, he was still the same young boy who once promised himself that he would make it out. The only difference was that now he had. And his story was just beginning. We often see billionaires as people who are born lucky, who inherit wealth, or who had connections that opened every door. But this man's journey shattered that illusion. He wasn't handed anything. He wasn't born into luxury. He didn't have powerful friends waiting to fund his dreams. What he did was grit, the kind of determination that can turn dust into diamonds. As his wealth grew, so did his responsibilities. Suddenly, he wasn't just responsible for himself and his family. He had thousands of employees depending on him. Every decision he made could impact entire communities. Every choice carried weight. This pressure would have broken many people, but he thrived under it. He had been forged in fire long before he stepped into corporate boardrooms. The hardships of his youth had prepared him for the storms of success. Still, life has a way of testing even the strongest. With more money came more challenges. He faced lawsuits from competitors trying to bring him down. He faced betrayal from people he once trusted. He faced constant scrutiny from the media who searched for flaws in his character. At one point, a scandal erupted, not because he had done something wrong, but because powerful rivals wanted to discredit him. Headlines painted him as reckless, irresponsible, even dangerous. For weeks, he felt the weight of the world pressing against him, but he remembered his own philosophy: problems are opportunities in disguise. Instead of hiding, he confronted the storm head-on. He stood before cameras, spoke honestly, and showed the world that he wasn't afraid of the truth. Slowly, the narrative shifted. People admired his courage. Customers remained loyal. His company not only survived the scandal, it came out stronger. This resilience became his trademark. Investors trusted him not because he was perfect, but because he was unshakable. Communities admired him not because he was flawless, but because he was real, and aspiring entrepreneurs looked to him as proof that success wasn't about never falling. It was about always getting back up. With his name now respected globally, he expanded his empire beyond fintech. He invested in real estate on a massive scale, developing affordable housing projects that gave families a chance to live with dignity. He poured money into renewable energy, believing that true wealth meant leaving behind a better planet. He even ventured into media and entertainment, producing stories that highlighted diverse voices and experiences often ignored by mainstream industries. But perhaps his most impactful move was in education. He knew firsthand how knowledge, or the lack of it, could shape a person's future. So he founded a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships, building schools, and funding mentorship programs. Thousands of young people who once had no hope of higher education suddenly had doors open for them. For him, this was the true measure of success, not the billions in his bank account, but the countless lives he could transform. Through it all, he never lost his connection to the streets that raised him. He would often return quietly, without cameras, to walk the same blocks where he once dreamed of more. He spoke with kids on the corners, reminding them that their circumstances didn't define them. He shook hands with single mothers, assuring them that their struggles were seen. He never wanted to be worshipped as untouchable. He wanted to be remembered as someone who proved it was possible. Yet, even in the midst of his generosity, he continued to push himself. Billionaire status was not the end of his journey. It was just a milestone. He believed in growth and constantly reaching higher, in never settling for enough. He invested in cutting-edge technology like artificial intelligence, space exploration, and biotechnology. He partnered with scientists and visionaries, aiming not just to make money, but to push humanity forward. This dual identity, both humble and ambitious, made him unique. He could sit with presidents and CEOs, then turn around and eat at a food stand in his old neighborhood. He could speak on world stages, then return home and laugh with childhood friends. He was both the dreamer and the achiever, the underdog and the leader. But what truly set him apart was his message. He never said, "Look at me." Instead, he said, "Look at what's possible." He reminded people that his story wasn't about being exceptional. It was about refusing to quit. He told audiences that the world will give you every reason to stop, but all you need is one reason to keep going. For him, that reason had always been love. Love for his mother, love for his community, love for the promise he had made in silence as a boy. There came a moment when magazines named him among the most powerful people in the world. His face was recognized globally. His name became synonymous with wealth and resilience. Yet, when asked what he considered his greatest achievement, he didn't mention his company, his investments, or his billions. He simply said, "Keeping my promise." Those 3 words carried the weight of every tear, every sacrifice, every sleepless night that had led him here. The legacy he built wasn't written only in numbers, but in hearts. He wasn't just a billionaire, he was a movement. He was a reminder that every child in poverty could dare to dream, that every rejection could become redirection, and that every setback could become a setup for greatness. And as he looked to the future, he didn't see an ending. He saw a beginning. He saw the next generation rising, ready to take the torch. He knew that his billions could one day vanish, but his story, the proof that greatness can come from anywhere, would remain forever. Every new level of success brings a new set of challenges. For him, billionaire status wasn't just wealth, it was visibility. The world watched his every move. His decisions didn't just affect his employees anymore. They could influence markets, shift industries, and inspire millions of people. It was power, but it was also pressure. And power always attracts both admiration and envy. Some saw him as a trailblazer. Others tried to paint him as lucky or undeserving. There were whispers, "He doesn't belong here. He got lucky. It won't last long." These voices came from competitors, critics, and sometimes even people within his own community who couldn't imagine that someone like him could truly win. But he had trained his mind long ago to filter out the noise. He understood a universal truth. When you rise, people will either clap for you or try to pull you down. His focus was never on proving the doubters wrong. It was on proving himself right. One of the biggest tests of his career came when his company faced a global financial crisis. Investors panicked, markets crashed, and entire industries trembled. Billions of dollars were wiped out in days. Many companies folded, but he refused to let fear control him. Instead of retreating, he saw an opportunity. While others sold in panic, he invested. While others cut staff, he restructured and retrained his workforce. He reminded his team, storms don't destroy eagles. They teach them how to fly higher. That mindset saved his company. While competitors collapsed, his firm survived. And within a few years, it thrived even more than before. This moment cemented his reputation as a visionary leader, someone who could not only build wealth, but protect it through storms. His resilience caught the attention of world leaders. Governments began inviting him to speak about financial inclusion, poverty reduction, and innovation. He sat across from presidents, prime ministers, and royalty. Yet whenever he returned home, he was still the same man who remembered sleeping on a thin mattress in a crowded room. That duality, global recognition yet grounded humility, made him magnetic. But beyond business and politics, he also faced a personal transformation. Wealth gave him freedom, but it also tested his values. With billions at his disposal, he could have lived in endless luxury, private jets, super yachts, golden mansions. And yes, he enjoyed success, but he made a choice: never let money own him. He lived comfortably, but not excessively. He taught his children that the greatest inheritance he could give them wasn't wealth, but wisdom, discipline, and vision. His family became central to his legacy. He wanted his kids to understand both sides of his journey, the struggle and the success. He took them to boardrooms, but also walked them through the neighborhoods where he grew up, reminding them, this is where it began. Never forget it.
Yeah.
As the years passed, he expanded his empire even further. He entered technology, healthcare, and even space ventures. He invested in startups led by young innovators, especially those overlooked by traditional investors. He became known as a kingmaker, someone whose belief and funding could turn small ideas into global companies. And yet, even with all this expansion, his heart remained tied to service. He launched initiatives to end hunger in underprivileged areas, funded hospitals in regions that lacked proper health care, and partnered with nonprofits to build schools in developing countries. The more he earned, the more he gave. The press eventually began calling him the people's billionaire. Unlike others who isolated themselves in luxury, he stayed accessible. He shook hands, shared stories, laughed with strangers, and listened to the struggles of ordinary people. He believed that wealth disconnected from humanity was empty. But success never comes without new mountains to climb. In his late 40s, he faced his toughest internal battle, not with money, not with business, but with himself. After decades of grinding, pushing, and achieving, he asked what's next. He had already become a billionaire, a philanthropist, and a global icon. But was that the end? Or was there another chapter waiting to be written? This question haunted him. Many billionaires at his stage had slowed down, focusing only on comfort, but he couldn't. He had lived his whole life with fire in his chest, and that fire wasn't fading, was evolving. He realized that his true mission was not just to build wealth, but to build legacy. So he shifted gears. Instead of focusing solely on expanding his fortune, he dedicated himself to mentoring the next generation. He created entrepreneur academies in cities around the world. He built incubators where young innovators could bring their ideas to life. He poured his knowledge into speeches, books, and documentaries. He understood that money could vanish, but wisdom, when shared, multiplied forever. In one of his most powerful speeches, he stood before thousands of young people and said, "I am not special, I am proof. Proof that your beginnings don't define your endings. Proof that poverty is not permanent. Proof that dreams don't die unless you let them. If I can do it, so can you." The crowd erupted, but more importantly, lives were changed. Stories began emerging of young men and women who had heard his words, applied his principles, and built their own success. Some credited him for helping them escape gangs, others for starting businesses, and many for believing in themselves for the first time. That was his true wealth, not the billions in his account, but the ripple effect of his story. By the time he turned 50, he wasn't just a billionaire businessman. He was a global symbol of resilience, vision, and hope. His story was studied in universities. His journey was turned into documentaries, and his words became quotes etched into classrooms and offices. But if you asked him what mattered most, he would smile and say, "Keeping that promise I made as a boy." As the years continued to unfold, his influence reached places he never imagined. He was no longer just a businessman, no longer just a success story. He had become a global voice. From universities to parliaments, from community halls to the biggest world summits, his name carried weight, not because of the billions he owned, but because of the authenticity he carried. People could sense he was real, and yet, behind the success, he remained a man of routine. He still woke up before sunrise. He still wrote down his goals each morning. He still spent time reflecting on gratitude, reminding himself that everything he had could be taken in an instant. These rituals kept him balanced. He had seen too many wealthy people lose themselves to ego and excess. He promised himself early on that if he ever reached the top, he would never let the top change his soul. He also deepened his philanthropic work. Instead of just writing checks, he rolled up his sleeves and got personally involved. He sat with school children in villages, listening to their dreams. He toured hospitals, comforting patients. He worked with governments to reform systems of inequality. For him, charity wasn't about headlines, it was about impact. But in all this service, he still carried an unshakable drive for innovation. He launched a venture capital fund that focused exclusively on underrepresented entrepreneurs, people of color, women, and those from disadvantaged backgrounds. He wanted to break the cycle he had once fought against, a system that ignored talent because of where someone came from. With his support, thousands of new businesses flourished, reshaping industries and proving that genius knows no boundaries. Of course, life wasn't without its setbacks. Even as a billionaire, even as an icon, he faced failures. Some projects collapsed, some investments lost millions, some ideas didn't work. But instead of hiding them, he talked about them openly. He told people, failure isn't the opposite of success, it's the ingredient of success. This honesty only made people respect him more. As he grew older, he began to think more deeply about time. Money could always be earned, but time could never be bought back. He realized that true wealth was freedom, freedom to choose how you spend your hours, who you spend them with, and what legacy you leave behind. This realization shifted his focus even more toward mentoring family and legacy projects. One day at a global leadership forum, a young man stood up and asked him, "What's the secret? How did you do it?" The room grew silent. Everyone wanted to hear the answer. He smiled and replied, "There is no secret. There's just a decision. The decision to not quit, no matter how hard it gets. That decision, repeated every day, creates a life that looks like a miracle from the outside. But on the inside, it's just consistency and faith." That the crowd erupted in applause, but those words stuck like fire in the hearts of everyone who heard them. They were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. By now, his name was etched in history. He was listed among the greatest entrepreneurs of the century. His story was taught in schools as an example of perseverance. Movies and documentaries told his tale, yet he still visited his old neighborhood, often without security, walking the same streets where his journey began. Kids would gather around him, eyes wide, hanging on his every word. And he would tell them the same thing he had always said, "If I could do it, so can you." The beauty of his journey wasn't just the billions. It wasn't the fame or the power. The beauty was the transformation from a boy who once counted coins just to eat to a man who could feed nations, from a child who once dreamed in silence to a leader whose voice carried across the globe. From being overlooked, underestimated, and doubted to being unstoppable. And perhaps the most powerful part was that he never claimed to be extraordinary. He never said he was chosen or different. Instead, he insisted he was ordinary and that his story was proof that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things. In interviews, journalists would ask him about his proudest possessions. He never mentioned cars, houses, or luxury. Instead, he said his proudest possessions were the letters he received, letters from people who had heard his story and changed their lives. Letters from young men who left gangs to start businesses. Letters from single mothers who found courage to pursue education. Letters from children who now believed in possibilities they never imagined. To him, those letters were priceless. By the time he reached his 60s, he was no longer running companies day to day. He had built a strong team, empowered leaders, and trusted the next generation to carry the vision forward. His role became that of a teacher, a storyteller, a guardian of hope. He traveled less for business and more for inspiration, speaking, teaching, and sharing his journey. One evening, while reflecting on his life during a quiet sunset, he whispered to himself, "I kept the promise." That promise, to never let his mother's sacrifices go to waste, to never let poverty chain him, to rise no matter the cost. And in keeping that promise, he not only changed his life, he changed the lives of millions. And so his story lives on, a story not about wealth, but about willpower, not about luck, but about resilience, not about privilege, but about persistence. His life is a reminder that your background does not define your destiny. Your beginnings do not limit your endings. And that even from the darkest corners of struggle, a light can rise bright enough to illuminate the world. He was once just a boy with a dream. He became a man with a mission, and now he will forever be remembered as the Black billionaire who proved to the world that greatness has no boundaries. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing and interesting videos. Goodbye.